Daniel returned from Lou's diner with a box of cinnamon rolls only to find his mother sitting on the porch, her knitting in hand, and the front door sealed with a brand new keypad lock. The morning air bit lightly at the back of his neck as he stepped out of his truck. The box in his hand still radiated gentle warmth, its sugary contents perfuming the cold. Yellow maple leaves, freshly fallen, crunched beneath his boots as he walked up the path, frowning at the unfamiliar keypad bolted beside the doorframe. Eleanor didn't look up from her knitting. She moved the needles like she'd been waiting all morning, as if the lock had always been there. Daniel stared at the keypad, then at the slip of laminated paper taped just below it. Pending compliance review, the notice read in Helvetica so large it practically shouted. When did this happen? He asked, raising the box slightly as though cinnamon rolls could negotiate entry. Eleanor glanced over the rim of her glasses. Sometime before sunrise, I'd guess. Brenda's people are early birds. He set the box down on the porch rail and stepped closer. That Brenda woman, you mean the HOA president? She calls herself that. I call her overly ambitious. The keypad blinked red when he tried the old code. His mother didn't flinch. The porch smelled of yarn and old pine and something sweet that probably wasn't the rolls. He looked at her again, still composed, still knitting as if none of it mattered. 2 days ago, May Linhart had leaned over the counter at her little grocery and whispered conspiratorially, "You keep ignoring those notices from Brenda, she'll try and reclaim your siding next." Daniel had laughed then, still brushing off the warning. But now, seeing the deadbolt replaced without a word, the reality settled in his stomach like a stone. "Want some tea?" Eleanor asked, setting the needles down neatly across her lap. "It'll have to be out back." She rose slowly, her frame slight but upright, and stepped down into the side yard. Daniel followed, still clutching the box. The side gate creaked open with a rusty sigh. Fallen leaves scattered ahead like a warning. Around back, the old mudroom door stood closed but familiar. She knelt, reached under a loose board in the siding, and retrieved a small metallic device, no larger than a remote, with faded tape labeling the buttons. "Is that?" he began. "Legacy access unit," she said calmly. "Battery still holds. They forgot we ever used these." A short beep. The door clicked. Eleanor stepped inside first, flipping on the overhead light that hummed to life above the kitchen sink. It cast warm gold over the tiled counter, the worn kettle, and the empty mug waiting as if it had known they'd return this way. Daniel followed, carefully shutting the door behind him. "Do you want to call someone about this?" he asked. "File a complaint?" "They'll have a justification ready," she replied. "Non-compliant siding. Decorative shrubs. Parking distance from the curb." She poured water into the kettle with unhurried precision. "They don't need to win. They just need you to back down quietly." Daniel set the box of cinnamon rolls on the table. "This house passed every inspection 2 years ago." Eleanor nodded. "Before Brenda took over." She handed him a mug. The tea smelled faintly of mint and something he couldn't quite name, nostalgia, maybe. They sat at the table while the sun filtered through the wide back window. The front door might have been sealed, but the house still breathed, still held warmth. Moments later, May Linhart tapped gently at the back door, holding a small jar wrapped in red twine. "Didn't want it to freeze," she said. "It's pear preserves. Frank used to love it with sharp cheddar." Her eyes flitted toward Daniel, then to Eleanor, then to the cinnamon rolls. "Guess you found your way in." "Barely," Daniel said. "They changed the front lock." May shook her head. "She's pushing it too far. You know, Brenda told the book club your gutters were a safety hazard. Said those quins need structure." "I'm sure she meant well," Eleanor replied, but her voice had a thrum underneath, more observation than agreement. When May left, the house felt quieter, though not emptier. Daniel wandered into the front room, pausing at the console table beneath the window. A neat stack of envelopes sat there, unopened, all bearing the HOA emblem. He picked one up. "How long have these been sitting here?" Eleanor joined him, drying her hands on a tea towel. Long enough. I stopped opening them when they stopped pretending to be suggestions. He turned them over slowly, counted at least 8. You weren't going to say anything? I was waiting to see if they remembered who built the system they're using. Daniel stared at her. What system? Eleanor crossed to the small cabinet near the fireplace and opened a narrow drawer. Inside lay a rectangular remote, sleek, faded, industrial. They installed the system, she said. I wrote it. Daniel froze. Wait. You mean this system? The HOAs? Eleanor pulled a dusty plastic binder from a shelf labeled Cedar Ridge Phase 2, Access Protocols. She didn't sneeze, didn't even blink at the dust that puffed up in the beam of sunlight slicing through the attic window. The room smelled like dry paper, old cedar, and the faint metallic bite of yesterday's coffee rising from a half-warm thermos on her desk. The binder was heavier than it looked, like it remembered being important. She handed it to Daniel without a word, letting him feel the weight. He opened it carefully, the rings creaking like they hadn't moved in years. Inside were diagrams, neatly drawn in black pen, annotated in her crisp handwriting. You really built all this? She sat down beside him on the old swivel chair, crossing her arms. Designed it. Wrote the firmware. Oversaw 3 beta rollouts before HOA even got their first property in Phase 1. They wanted security. What they really wanted was control. Daniel's brow furrowed as he flipped through the pages. The schematics looked like they belonged in a lab, not a sleepy HOA in Colorado. Each system node was clearly marked: camera access points, perimeter gates, override protocols. He paused at a page that showed a dotted line leading to a box labeled root level portal. Is this still online? Maybe. If they were lazy. Eleanor reached under the desk, pulled out a flat gray laptop caked in fingerprint dust and stickers from her contracting days. This thing hasn't been powered up since before you left college. Let's hope the fan still spins. As she booted it up, Daniel leaned against the desk and stared out the small circular window. The light caught on the neighbor's house across the street, a modest 2-story with a bright blue HOA-approved mailbox. Just beneath the eave, a small dome camera blinked. Watching. Always watching. I remember you once called this whole setup overdesigned paranoia, he said. I was being polite. The laptop screen flickered to life with a mechanical whir and the choppy glow of a CRT display. The boot sequence rolled like green typewriter letters across black. Daniel watched as Eleanor logged in without hesitation, her fingers still sharp on the keys. A directory list appeared, and she scrolled down until she hit a folder labeled cedarfacii_config. Here we go. A moment later, she double-clicked a file and a window popped up showing a log of access timestamps. At least 3 entries from the past 72 hours. Eleanor's jaw tensed. They've been pinging our front camera. After hours. No permit. Daniel stepped closer. Brenda? Or someone she trusts. Maybe someone young enough not to question orders. The name Eric Holloway bubbled to the surface of Daniel's thoughts. He had seen the kid around, often near the community signposts or adjusting something electrical, never speaking much, just watching. The kind of quiet that wasn't peace. Daniel composed an email on his phone to the HOA address listed in one of the unopened letters. He asked for camera access logs, entry records, the usual. He received an auto-reply: "Thank you for contacting Maple Hollow HOA. Your concern will be reviewed during regular compliance sessions." Eleanor didn't say anything, just gave a small huff of air from her nose, which Daniel now recognized as her version of "I told you so." Later that afternoon, May dropped by with a small envelope of clipped coupons and a story. "Brenda was bragging at the garden club this morning," she said. "Said the last non-compliant lot finally had its locks updated. She looked like she won a trophy." Daniel forced a smile. "Did she mention our house by name?" May hesitated. "No, but she patted Margaret Hannigan's shoulder and said, sometimes the system just has to push a little harder." Then winked. She handed over the coupons and added, "And don't think I didn't notice that camera watching your porch last night." After May left, Daniel took a walk around the block. The air was crisp and clean, but his breath didn't steam anymore, it had dropped below freezing. A thin layer of frost coated the grass, giving everything a silver edge. As he reached the end of the cul-de-sac, he saw Eric standing on a stepladder, fiddling with the base of a camera perched above a lamppost. A fresh HOA decal had just been slapped onto the post. Daniel slowed but didn't stop. "Tight fit," he called out, "casual." Eric glanced over his shoulder, startled, then quickly looked back down. "Just updating firmware," he mumbled. "Routine." "Sure," Daniel said, already walking away. He didn't need to confront him. Not yet. Back in the attic, Eleanor had brewed another pot of coffee. The laptop hummed like a radiator, and the screen now displayed a blinking login prompt to a remote terminal. She typed slowly this time. There was no rush, just precision. After a pause, she pressed enter. A soft beep. A long pause. Then the words, "Override access, granted." Daniel looked at her. "Let's see what they forgot to lock down." A small HOA drone hovered above the backyard while Daniel trimmed frost-burned vines. He looked up as the soft whirring broke the stillness. The drone, no larger than a football, hung just above the maple line, too low to be random, too quiet to be casual. It bore the familiar silver HOA decal near one rotor arm. Daniel squinted through the morning mist, one hand shielding his eyes as he watched the device tilt slightly, then sweep sideways in a deliberate arc. "They're scanning again," he muttered. From the kitchen, Eleanor peered through the back window, her expression unreadable. "Don't wave," she said evenly. "That's what they want, acknowledgement." Daniel stepped back from the trellis, pruning shears still in hand. The frost had claimed most of the vines along the fence, but he'd kept up the routine anyway. Familiar movements had a way of steadying the nerves. The drone blinked red once, then floated upward and disappeared behind the rooftop line. Inside, the attic workstation buzzed quietly. Eleanor had rerouted her old access portal through a virtual shell, masking their IP as a service kiosk. She sat beside the CRT monitor, her mug of coffee half forgotten on the desk. On screen, a stream of code scrolled, showing packets from unknown external nodes attempting handshake protocols. "They pinged our network twice last night," she said as Daniel came up the stairs. "Same access vector as the drone. They're not just watching. They're logging environmental data, motion, property boundaries. Doesn't that violate some kind of privacy statute?" She raised an eyebrow. "They don't care what's legal. They care what no one notices." Daniel crossed the room and sat beside her. "We should go public." "Not yet," Eleanor replied. "We're still just data. Let's become narrative first." He opened his laptop and navigated to the public HOA portal. The homepage flashed the usual images: smiling residents, landscaped walkways, a fake duck pond added digitally for seasonal ambience. He dug deeper into the document repository. Under a subfolder labeled Community Risk Mitigation, he found it. A plot map. Their house, highlighted in yellow, with a soft label in blue, pending realignment zone. "Pending what?" he asked aloud. Eleanor leaned over his shoulder. "Realignment means they're proposing redistricting the property. Probably under some fabricated safety measure. Drainage risk. Visual inconsistency. Whatever excuse the bylaws allow." He stared at the screen. "They can't do that without asking." "They won't," she said. "Until they've made you irrelevant." They called Grace that afternoon. She answered on speaker, her voice crackling slightly through the landline. "I've seen this before," she said. "It's aggressive quiet zoning. They reclassify residential lots as transitional buffers, then use footnotes to lower their compliance threshold. Eventually, they cite neighborhood consistency and pressure you out." Eleanor didn't respond right away. She just nodded slowly, like someone confirming the shape of an old suspicion. "That realignment tag," Grace continued, "it's a red flag. They're circling." Daniel glanced toward the attic window. And the drone? Illegal if they're collecting visual data over private land. But hard to prove without subpoenaed logs. They installed the system, Eleanor said. But I know what they forget to erase. That evening, Eleanor worked late at the desk, lines of code flowing from her fingers like piano notes. She isolated the node linked to their front camera feed and spliced a 6-hour loop of static backyard images, harmless, motionless. It would run nightly from 9 p.m. to 3 a.m., just long enough to confuse any audit, but short enough to avoid detection. Downstairs, Daniel poured coffee into an old thermos and set the kettle back on the burner. May's knock came soft and familiar at the side door. She held a folded flyer in one hand, a brown paper sack in the other. "Lou's got a new special," she said, handing the bag over. "Apple pie with melted sharp cheddar on top." "Don't make that face. It's not weird, it's tradition." Daniel laughed. "That's the most Midwest thing I've heard today." May tapped the flyer. "You might want to see this." The flyer announced the Winter Preview Gala, hosted by the HOA. Special guests, hot cider, investor networking opportunity, it read. "Investor?" Eleanor repeated. May nodded. "Brenda's been talking like she's running a startup, not a community board. Heard she's courting real estate groups out of state." Daniel took the flyer, rereading the fine print. Event to be held at the Maple Hollow Community Center. Later that night, Eleanor slid the final loop sequence into the firewall buffer and pressed enter. A green line confirmed the injection. Their cameras now showed what the HOA expected, a quiet, compliant home, unmoving and unthreatening. As they sat down in the den, Daniel checked his inbox again. No reply from the HOA. Nothing but silence dressed up as order. Grace called back just after 9. Her voice was firmer this time. "They're building a case. Using outdated zoning maps. Internal drafts marked as public consensus. None of it's legal. But if they present it well enough, it won't matter." "They're faking momentum," Eleanor said. "They've done it before," Grace replied. "They frame it as beautification. Compliance. Safety. But it's land. That's always the goal." Daniel leaned back in the old armchair, the cushions sagging just right. The room smelled like scorched dust and cinnamon from the earlier pie. Eleanor closed her laptop. "If they want war by protocol, let's give them protocol." "Daniel, should I be worried?" Grace placed the deed on the table and said simply, "They can't seize what was never theirs." The document settled like a stone on the old oak surface, its weight not from paper but from history. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of the second-floor office above Chapman's bookstore, painting soft patches of gold across shelves packed with law books, faded zoning maps, and a half-eaten scone. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, fingers tracing the embossed seal at the bottom of the page. Daniel remained quiet, but his shoulders dropped, just a little. "This," Grace continued, tapping the signature line, "is your leverage." Eleanor exhaled slowly. 1987, that's before the HOA existed. Exactly. Grace pushed her glasses up. "This title predates any association charter. You never ceded easement rights, nor authorized rezoning. What they're trying to do isn't just unethical, it's baseless." Daniel glanced around the room. The office smelled faintly of old leather and cinnamon wax. On the windowsill, a mug sat cooling next to a coaster shaped like the Colorado state line. He said, "Then why are they acting like they already own it?" Grace gave a thin smile. "Because most people never check." The door creaked behind them, and a tall, slightly hunched man in a field jacket stepped in, brushing wind from his sleeves. Greg Tully nodded once toward Grace, then toward Eleanor. "You said to bring the overlay." Grace motioned him to the side table. "Greg's a retired land surveyor. Helped digitize the original parcel maps back when GPS still needed clear skies." Greg unrolled a laminated blueprint with deliberate care. "This," he said, pointing with a capped pen, "is your lot. Original boundary lines. No annex notations, no conditional revisions. And this, he slid over a second sheet, is what the HOA posted online last quarter. The difference was subtle but damning. In the HOA map, Eleanor's property had been visually compressed, moved back nearly 10 feet, the backyard shaded in a different zoning color. They redrew your rear easement, Greg said. Without municipal filings, it's illegal. But looks official enough to mislead someone. Grace folded her arms. Which is exactly what they're counting on. As they spoke, Eleanor noticed Daniel reach into his coat pocket and pull out a small black USB drive. He slid it across the table. Eric left this under our mailbox. I think he wants someone else to know. Grace plugged it into her laptop. A folder opened, system_logs_2023_Q4. Inside, line after line of server activity, most of it mundane. But two entries stood out, 2:41 a.m. and 3:09 a.m., both tagged to administrator accounts. Grace clicked one open. Login, S. Dawson, she read aloud. Accessed asset control. Modified zone overlays. Downloaded permit templates. The next file was worse. Login, B. Holloway. Adjusted access permissions. Tagged 3 properties for non-compliance escalation. Eleanor tilted her head. That's code for retaliation. Before anyone could speak, the office door swung open. May stood there, cheeks flushed, holding a jar of bright orange jam wrapped in twine. Pumpkin preserves, she said cheerily. Made from the last ones in my garden. Daniel blinked. How'd you get in? Grace told me the code months ago, May replied, stepping inside and setting the jar down. Besides, it's a public building, sort of. She looked around, saw the maps, the laptop, the USB. Oh good, we're past the polite phase. Grace, unfazed, slid a new page from her printer tray. This is the cease and desist letter. I'm serving it on your behalf, Eleanor. It formally demands the HOA immediately cease all surveillance, enforcement, or physical interference with your property. How long do they have to respond? Daniel asked. 72 hours, Grace replied. Then we escalate to county filing. May sat on the windowsill with a small sigh. You might want to make it 48. I just saw Brenda and that mountain of a man, Stuart, walking your back property line with a clipboard and a contractor. Looked like they were planning a parade route. Eleanor chuckled dryly. They're always early when it's not their turn. Back at the house, Daniel watched Eleanor press her signature at the bottom of the C&D with deliberate care. Her hand didn't shake. The document was scanned and sent within minutes. That evening, the house sat quieter than usual. Daniel refreshed his inbox for the 3rd time since dinner. Finally, a message appeared, Maple Hollow HOA, formal response. He clicked. You are escalating unnecessarily. The HOA reserves full rights under Bylaw 11C. Eleanor glanced over his shoulder, then laughed softly. That clause was mine. They used it wrong. The blueprint showed a shaded block labeled Phase 3 Expansion, covering Eleanor's entire property. Daniel ran a hand slowly across the vellum printout, his palm catching faint creases where the paper had been folded too long. The lines were clean, clinical. The labels sat like a verdict, quiet but final. He sat back on the old couch, the blueprint stretched wide across Eleanor's coffee table, pushing aside yesterday's mail and a half-knitted scarf. Outside, wind tapped at the living room window. Dry branches dragged softly across the glass like a question with no answer. The lamp above cast a pool of golden light across the room, catching Eleanor's expression as she leaned forward, eyes narrowing. This legend box is mine, she murmured, pointing at the bottom corner. That's my notation style. I created this file. Daniel looked up. You mean, this exact map? I drew the original 20 years ago. For site integrity evaluations. This version, someone's duplicated it and added these new overlays. He exhaled through his nose, not quite a laugh. May warned me last week. Said their maps don't show homes anymore. Just opportunities. I thought she was being dramatic. She was being precise. They sat in silence a moment longer, the kind reserved for realizing something you suspected is worse than imagined. Daniel tapped his phone. The documents Eric had provided included metadata, timestamps, change logs, digital fingerprints. He expanded one of the entries. Brenda signed off on the modified version last month, he said. It was entered under a beautification and safety initiative. No public vote. No homeowner notification. Eleanor straightened her back. They're not fixing anything. They're preparing to sell. Across town, the Maple Hollow HOA event was in full swing. White string lights curled along the rafters of the community center's main hall. The room smelled faintly of cider and warmed vinyl. A potluck snack table had been set near the entrance, filled with paper plates of deviled eggs, mini muffins, and a casserole labeled Carol's Famous Taco Bake. At the front, a foam core poster read Neighborhood Vision 2024 in bold green type. Brenda Holloway stood just beneath it, her blazer crisp, her tone smooth. We must prepare, she said to the crowd of gathered homeowners, to evolve. Maple Hollow isn't just a neighborhood, it's an investment in shared quality of life. Daniel stood near the back, blueprint roll under one arm. He spotted Eric against the wall, hands in pockets, gaze fixed somewhere past the floor. Their eyes met only once, and briefly. Brenda gestured toward a screen displaying renderings, new walking trails, uniform fencing, a community greenhouse where Eleanor's garden currently bloomed. Some properties, regrettably, Brenda continued, have fallen below standard. We propose strategic reintegration, spaces optimized for cohesion and long-term wellness. Eleanor stepped in beside Daniel, handing him a folder. You ready? He nodded and walked forward, his voice steady. Before this vision gets adopted, maybe we should take a closer look at what's being altered. He unrolled the blueprint on a side table and flattened it under the nearest tray of cookie bars. Gasps rippled as a few neighbors leaned closer. This, Daniel said, tapping the large shaded block, is my mother's home. Marked as Phase 3 expansion. Brenda's smile held firm, but her fingers twitched near the podium. Sir, I'm afraid these documents are not part of the official agenda. They're from your system, Daniel interrupted. Provided through internal access. With change logs. You redrew these zones without informing residents. A beat passed. Then another. From the crowd, someone whispered, is that true? Another voice, louder, is my lot on there too? Brenda took a breath. Those documents were illegally obtained. From the far side of the room, Eric turned slowly and took one quiet step backward, away from the stage, away from his mother. The portal blinked to life after years of dormancy. Eleanor whispered, I can't believe they never changed the root password. The screen glowed with that faint green tint only old machines could produce, casting a ghostly light over the attic walls. Outside, flakes of snow drifted quietly past the window, catching in the curls of cold air sneaking through the wooden frame. Daniel stood beside her, wrapped in the thick navy scarf she'd knit last winter, one hand on the back of her chair, the other holding a mug still steaming with peppermint tea. Lines of command prompts rolled slowly upward. Each one confirmed access to layers of the security system Eleanor had helped architect decades ago, before the HOA existed, before her name was quietly erased from their documentation. They didn't delete it, she said, her fingers moving with the ease of memory. They just buried it. Under branding and drop-down menus. Grace had said something like that not long ago, they don't erase the systems, they hide them in decoration. And here it was, hidden in the same IBM shell Eleanor once hauled from site to site in her consulting days, long before Maple Hollow tried to forget who made them secure. A folder marked /audit_legacy blinked at the bottom corner. Eleanor hesitated, then clicked. Inside were logs, clean, time-stamped, and unaltered. Camera IDs, access IPs, bandwidth usage. She scrolled to the most recent, 3 days ago. The file played silently, showing the feed from the Quinn's front porch. It wasn't a static image or loop. It was a live stream, tagged as routine HOA check. Only, the tag's metadata had been altered. Eleanor brought up the revision history. There it was, the IP had been redirected through an internal proxy, by B.Holloway. She spoofed it, Eleanor said. Made it look like a standard check when it was surveillance. Daniel took a slow breath. Grace needs to see this. They backed up the files onto 2 thumb drives, labeling one for legal use and one for press. Eleanor sipped her tea, the peppermint biting faintly at the back of her throat, warming her more than the radiator ever did. An email pinged. No subject. No sender. Just a line of text, check folder/audit_legacy. She's trying to help, Daniel said. Or clear his conscience, Eleanor replied. But she didn't sound bitter. Just tired. Inside the folder was a secondary directory, valuation_maps_draft_internal. Dozens of PDF scans of property blueprints appeared, each home tagged with phrases like underperforming asset, consolidation ready, or buffer expansion opportunity. Her own home had been marked with a red icon labeled Priority, Q1. That night, Daniel and Grace met at the county sheriff's satellite office. Grace carried a folder the width of a phone book, each tab labeled and dated. Daniel handed over the thumb drive, and Deputy Sheriff Paul Ruddick, a tall man with a slow but deliberate manner, reviewed the complaint with the attention of someone who'd been waiting for someone else to say it first. They've been using HOA systems to collect unauthorized surveillance, modify legal zoning documents, and manipulate resident compliance, Grace said, tapping the printed email from Eric. We have proof. We're requesting an injunction and a formal investigation. Ruddick nodded slowly. This is gonna turn a few heads at the county board. That's the idea, Grace replied. By morning, a light blanket of snow had covered the lawns of Maple Hollow, smoothing the lines between property boundaries, as if nature itself wanted to erase their maps. Eleanor sat in the living room with a second cup of tea, wrapped in a flannel shawl. Rena Morales knocked once, then let herself in. May had apparently given her the spare key. I read the draft, Rena said, holding up a folder. If you're okay with it, I'd like to run it in Sunday's print. People around here still read the paper. Eleanor nodded. Truth deserves ink. That afternoon, Deputy Ruddick parked in front of the Holloway house. He didn't bring backup, only a manila envelope and the kind of calm authority that didn't need volume. Brenda opened the door before he even knocked. She was still in her blouse from the HOA event, though it looked slightly rumpled now, and her lipstick had faded just enough to make her look tired instead of polished. He handed her the papers. She stared at them, then past them, to where Daniel stood on the sidewalk beside Eleanor, watching in silence. Brenda's voice didn't rise, but her eyes sparked as she said, You think you've won something? Daniel Chi-Dap, not yet. The room at Silverwood Bend Civic Hall was packed wall to wall. Brenda stood at the podium, her voice brittle but sharp. Outside, snow drifted down in delicate spirals, coating the courthouse steps in soft white. Inside, the heater hummed low beneath the hum of murmurs, boots shuffled against linoleum, and wool coats rustled as neighbors squeezed into rows of folding chairs, many brought from their own garages. A banner reading Neighborhood Voices hung above the dais, draped in evergreen garlands and faded red ribbon. Brenda gripped the podium like a life preserver. Her smile had the tightness of habit, not conviction. We are here to clear misunderstandings, she began, her voice steadying as she scanned the crowd. Recent accusations against this board are being exaggerated by individuals with personal grievances. Eleanor sat 3 rows back, Daniel beside her, hands folded calmly. Grace stood near the aisle, a thin stack of papers in hand, spine straight like a silent metronome. Rena Morales, notebook open, camera blinking red, sat off to the left. Sheriff Ruddick leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, his uniform dusted faintly with snow. Brenda continued, We must not allow emotion to override structure. The HOA exists to protect property values and ensure communal harmony. That has never changed. Grace stepped forward without waiting for permission. With respect, I'd like to address the board and the community. Brenda hesitated, then gestured stiffly. Briefly. Grace laid her papers on the auxiliary table. This is a timeline of internal system access tied to Brenda Holloway and Stuart Dawson. The logs indicate unauthorized use of surveillance portals, deliberate modification of zoning overlays, and concealed reclassification of private properties as expansion candidates. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Rena tapped her laptop, and a slide appeared on the overhead screen, an original blueprint marked Map Revision, 2003, internal only. A few gasps rippled. The next slide showed the HOA's current map, overlaid in red. A dozen properties, many belonging to residents in the room, were now listed as pending beautification easement. The room quieted in that dangerous way people do just before asking real questions. From the third row, a voice called, "Where did our HOA dues go?" Another joined in. "Did we vote on this?" Brenda raised her hand, voice sharper now. "These were executive decisions, made in the interest of efficiency. You entrusted us to act on your behalf." Eric Holloway stood slowly near the back, the kind of slow that said he didn't want to but had already decided he must. "I was asked," he said, holding up his phone, "to erase archive maps from the HOA's drive and replace them with modified files. This is the email Brenda sent me." He read aloud, "Legacy layouts are irrelevant. Phase 3 revisions should reflect a clean slate. Erase the noise." Brenda turned toward him, the color draining fast. "Eric, that was internal discussion, you don't understand the legal." "You told me to hide things," he said. "You told me it wasn't my job to ask why." The room crackled. Someone knocked over a cup. Sheriff Ruddock pushed off the wall and stepped forward. Brenda's composure began to splinter. "This is all political. Eleanor's not even a consistent resident. She came back just to stir up trouble. She doesn't understand how this place works." Eleanor stood, slow and calm. "The outsider," she said softly, "wrote your system." Gasps again. Then silence, the heavy kind. Sheriff Ruddock approached the podium. "Per the authority of the County Oversight Board, and pending investigation, I am placing Brenda Holloway and Stuart Dawson under administrative suspension from all HOA responsibilities effective immediately. Interim leadership will be appointed until this matter is resolved." Brenda stepped back from the mic, stunned, her eyes darting across the crowd for a foothold. None came. As people stood, some whispering, others clapping softly, Eric moved toward Eleanor. His breath visible now as the door cracked open to the cold outside. "I don't know how to say thank you," he said, voice low. "But I hope I did something right." A new cedar sign stood where the HOA office mailbox once was, Silverwood Bend, a community, not a code. Its edges were hand-carved, the letters smoothed and darkened by weatherproof stain, mounted neatly on two fresh posts dug into the snowbank beside the old walkway. Someone had tied a small red ribbon at the base, likely May, and a few sprigs of cedar hung beneath the sign like a blessing. Snow clung gently to the top, but it didn't obscure the words. They were too solid now to disappear. Behind the Quinn house, the porch glowed with string lights draped from gutter to fence post. Folded chairs, mismatched but clean, circled space heaters and blankets. The air was rich with cinnamon, cider, and the faint hum of holiday music playing from a Bluetooth speaker someone had stuck into a flower pot. Eleanor stood beside the grill, tongs in one hand, flipping slices of cornbread onto a ceramic plate. Daniel emerged from the kitchen with a tray of hot cider, cinnamon sticks poking jauntily from each mug. May waved from the folding table near the shed. "That cider's got a kick, you know," she called out. Grace sent it up with her compliments and a legal-sized note that said, "For celebration purposes only." Everyone laughed. Walt handed out peppermint stick cookies from a tin marked Quinn family recipes. He claimed he'd baked them, but nobody believed him. Even so, they disappeared fast. Under the porch's overhang, Eric hovered near a small wooden crate he'd repurposed into a tech stand. A tiny screen looped a welcome message for new residents, and above it, he'd mounted a switchboard-style map where neighbors could leave notes, trade tools, or request help. "I'm calling it the Human API," he said sheepishly to Daniel. "Analog, but with style." You're getting dangerously sentimental, Daniel replied, clinking his cider against Eric's plastic cup. Not long after, Eleanor was called to the center by May, who cleared her throat with the pomp of someone used to church announcements. "We'd like to thank Eleanor Quinn," May said, voice steadier than usual, "for reminding us that a good system isn't the one that watches you, but the one that protects what matters." A pause, then more softly, "and for reminding us we're neighbors, not lot numbers." The crowd clapped, some raising mugs, others just nodding, but the feeling ran deeper than sound. It warmed the air more than the heaters did. Eric stepped forward, holding a small package wrapped in butcher paper and string. "This is for you," he said, offering it to Eleanor. "Printed and bound. The access logs. Your system. Your name. Thought you might want to own that again." Eleanor took it with both hands. The spine had been neatly sewn. On the cover, "Legacy Root Access, compiled by E.H. "You even used my color coding," she said. "I had to guess the yellow tab meaning." "You guessed right." Later, as the sun settled behind the rooftops and the first real stars blinked into the pale December sky, Daniel and Eleanor stood at the edge of the garden. The old fencing had been replaced, clean cedar rails now framed the once scraggly bed, soon to be replanted come spring. Daniel pulled a wrapped wooden plaque from behind a bench. Together, they mounted it to the corner post. Burned into the grain were the words, "The Quinn Porch, always open." Eleanor traced the lettering with her thumb. "I used to think we built homes for protection," she said. "Now I think it's for invitation." Daniel looked down at her. "You still have the override access?" She smiled, sipping her cider. "No need. We've got keys now, real ones." Under a quiet snowfall and the soft glow of porch lights, the people of Silverwood Bend remembered what it meant to be neighbors, not just names on a registry or parcels on a map, but guardians of something shared. What began as quiet suspicion unfolded into a truth too strong to ignore, led not by volume, but by vigilance, resolve, and a mother who once wrote the code they used against her. Rules are meant to protect, not to control. When power forgets that, it's the people who must remind it, together. Maybe all it takes is one locked door and the right key to open everything back up again.